Here it is, episode 2 of Stick to F1 with Anthony Mingioni, Jason Myrtetus. Reaction to the French Grand Prix at Paul Ricard, and it delivered a winner. And this guy right here, as I hold up a little model car of Max Verstappen, he gets the win. Red Bull gets the job done, and Mercedes, a lot of questions after this race, Ant. And boy, strategy played a big role in this.
Big time. And again, Max, they did the decision by Red Bull to go to a two-stop strategy with Max Verstappen, allowed him to have fresher tires. He switched over to the mediums in the race. It was a good strategy in this case. It was definitely a concern on both sides, I think, in terms of tire management. And I think it was brilliant work on Red Bull's part, specifically, obviously, Verstappen pitting on 33. And then, of course, the concerns that occurred, and we know how good Checo Perez is in terms of managing his tires. It was a perfect split strategy from Christian Horner and his crew, I think, in this race that allowed them to take 2 podium spots and widen their lead in the Constructors' Championship.
Yeah, and it was funny, before the race, Christian Horner was saying, after Max Verstappen secured pole and Checo was 4th, he said, if we can beat Mercedes here, we can beat them anywhere, because this has been a Mercedes track, albeit they've only raced at this current track 2 times, but 2 front row lockouts for Mercedes, and Hamilton had both victories coming in. And this is quite the statement, isn't it, from Red Bull going forward, now that we're back to traditional racetracks and off the street circuits for a bit?
Exactly, especially when you're going to be heading over to the Red Bull ring for 2 races here. Yeah. And this is a massive opportunity here, I think, with this win. 3 straight now, a hat trick for Red Bull. They've won the last 3 races, obviously, with Max taking it at Monaco and Sergio taking it in Baku. This is a massive, on a track that going into this weekend, we heard a lot of concern from Red Bull. Whether or not this was a Hamilton-like strategy from Verstappen to kind of keep expectations low and then explode. We saw going into this weekend, the pace that Max had on this track, especially in qualies, was amazing. He was great in free. He was really good in free practice as well. So just a great overall weekend, I think, again, for Red Bull. The strategy paid off on a track that Mercedes has traditionally taken, and there's a lot of, as we stated, a lot of questions.
Early in the race, in turn, I guess it's technically turn 2, where Verstappen just couldn't hold it together, and he gives up the lead on the first lap. Hamilton takes the lead, and then Verstappen couldn't stay within his DRS, and it looked like Hamilton had control of the race. But what we found out in that first stint in particular was that tire degradation was way more than they thought it was going to be going into this race on those mediums, which everybody started on, with the exception of a couple guys starting on the hards like Vettel. But the degradation really is what changed the entire complexion of this race. Leclerc came in on lap 14 to get a change of tires.
He was the first one in. There were more, again, everyone's in at least once, with the exception, I think the only 2 was, again, I think the 2-stop, I think, was just Max. I had the other one here one second, but yeah, it was definitely some major concerns. You heard it right through lap 9. Starting around lap 9, you really start to hear about the tire, about degradation, already starting. Both Hamilton and Bottas reporting graining on their tire on lap 9. That was a concern there. Bottas, again, did lock up, I believe, on lap 12. So even at that point, they definitely had their concerns in terms of just overall through the race. You still have to worry about that first turn crosswind as well. Just you're compensating for that, and that added further to the degradation, I think, as well, when you're coming out of those initial turns, especially when you get into the technical parts of the track and you're really leaning on those tires.
Were you surprised that this racetrack delivered as many overtakes as it did, as many opportunities? Because it felt like as the coverage went up and down the field, there was overtake. I think Danny Ricciardo, I think he may have overtaken 50 guys in the race. It seemed like every time they went to him, he was overtaking Giovinazzi, then it was Kimi Räikkönen, then it was a Ferrari. There was overtakes happening, especially into that first chicane.
Yeah, that was where, and that's where, and most, I think, race people who look at the current conversion of Paul Ricard say, if you're going to overtake people, the Montreal chicane is the key.
Yep.
And that's how it played out today. Like, they have to be. the race organizers at Paul Ricard have to feel very sort of vindicated to say races can, it's not just the track per se. There are elements of Paul Ricard where even if you do like a slight tweak on it, could be even better. But it delivered today, I think, because I think the quality of the driving was really good, despite dealing with the tire issues. And I know in the past, Danny's been critical of some elements of that track. I know when he was racing for Renault a few years ago, when he and Nico Hulkenberg specifically, mentioned obviously some of the long terms, turning the track into a one lane race, into a one lane race. And again, you get to that turn 3 where the track tends to narrow a little bit, and that tends to be a little bit of a choke point as you get into that curve and then come around and then around again, and then you're into the straight, curving into that long straight before you get to the Montreal chicane. And I think that's the area of the track where I've seen guys, unhappy, and with the dirtier happens. And later on in the technical parts where you just feel like the slipstream is just not there. In this race, though, there's the slip. Maybe again, it's aerodynamics. Maybe the wind, again, the direction of the wind. I have to take a look at wind direction for this race. I'm not sure what it was. I'll have to check.
Yeah, I know initially it was kind of pushing them down the main straight.
It was, and I think that helped in some cases. Again, Mother Nature can play a role here. I think we all were holding our breath to see if any rain was going to fall on the track. Cross fingers. That didn't happen. A few people were. You could hear David Crofty was saying, oh, dark clouds on the horizon, and everybody starts laughing like, "Don't you dare! Don't you do it!"
He put his rain dance in to try and add another variable to where there was already, guys battling on different strategies, and the chase group. It was like a cycling race. You had the chase group on the leader, kind of like Lewis did earlier this season on Red Bull and Max Verstappen. And the real thing, kind of coming up this week is that Mercedes, threw everything they had at this race. They needed to pull the nose of the aircraft up, and they really put a lot into this race. They had to feel confident coming in based on past performance here. This racetrack lends to their car, has lent to their car, and they got to go away shaking their head for two reasons. One, they didn't have the pace, and two, the strategy, once again, it was off for them, and it ended up costing them because the undercut meant so much, and they didn't seem prepared for it. So they got to go into this week and heading into Austria with not a lot of time to really, post-race decompress about it. And they got a lot of really big questions they got to ask themselves within that race team.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of, again, we're getting into Red Bull's home sort of home track for them, in this case at the Red Bull Ring. And it's, for them, it's going to be, Max likes that track. He's comfortable on that track. But again, getting back to Mercedes in this circumstance, again, there's a lot of questions. They were talking, as you said, a lot about their pace going into practice and going into the weekend. All the hype had been Mercedes dominates. Past pace only works so much. And if your car isn't there, like it's been in past years, you could, and again, I was wondering whether or not initially this was just Mercedes doing what they do, which is to try to, tamp things down, don't get everybody automatically assuming that they own this race. But in this case, it was viable concerns. And the strategy is really the area I think even more. The pace is a concern. The strategy, though, there seems to be just a lack of cohesion right now between the team and Valtteri Bottas. But most of the
problem.
Like it was going okay. Yeah. But he was insisting, I'm checking my notes again, when he started to really kind of say to them, guys, we really need to.
Probably around 28.
Yeah, around 28 or so. I think he stated it that. He said, 28. He stated that. Yeah, halfway through, he says, I won't be able to finish if we stay on team strategy, which was an aggressive strategy in that circumstance. He felt like he needed to come in. And then, of course, when we got to lap 45 and he gets past, he was hot. He was on the radio. We heard him. He says, cursing and saying, "They told you it was going to be a two spot in that case, a two-stop area." And now he knew it because, he's got Perez right on his heels.
Yep.
And he knows it. And once we get to that chicane and he locks up on turn 1 on lap 47, and then after that you see by lap 49, Perez attacks him at the chicane and then beats him. And one thing I will say about Val, and it was a rough day, but I thought Val did his best to try to help protect Lewis from Max.
Yeah, he was so underhanded
when Max
there.
tried to pass him, I thought Val did a really good job of doing his best to try to, with his, considering what his situation was, of really kind of battling Max tooth and nail coming out of that chicane. Even as Max was starting to pass, and there still was close enough where Max had to kind of focus in on Val for a second without keeping his eye on Hamilton. But ultimately, that strategy kind of fell for naught. It's a shame for Val, because I really thought today, you know, it was going good.
He deserved a better fate.
And then things went to crap in the final part.
Yeah, he deserved a better fate. Once he got into the marbles on the left side going into Sen, then it was all over for him, and there was just no way. And Max just pulled right away from him. Max pulled right away from Lewis Hamilton as well. I mean, he ended up winning the race by over 2 seconds as he got by him. He just had much fresher tires and was on the right tire at the right time. I'm a little astounded, too, that Mercedes never split a strategy here, because they both were on the same strategy, and it ultimately ended up being a losing strategy. I don't understand why, when you know Perez is going long, Max goes in. I thought maybe Max went in a little early because of the deg that was happening on those mediums, but you got to consider lighter fuel loads at that point, and the track rubbered in even more, so a little less wear, but called perfectly by Red Bull. But I was a worry of mine. Is he going to run out of tires just by getting there? He didn't. But I'm surprised Mercedes never even split the strategies here. That's one of the big head scratchers for me. You got two guys, they're on split. Why are you not on a split strategy?
Yeah, I didn't quite understand that as well. That, to me, was one of the biggest questions at the end of the race. Martin Brundle mentioned that as well in the broadcast, that, they went with a one-stop strategy for the whole team. Why not split it? Again, if Red Bull can split their strategy, why can't Mercedes? So this is a question, again, as we take a look at post-race press conferences, how Toto, responds to that. Toto Wolff responds to the decision to not split strategy.
Is this pressure? I mean, they've been in the pressure cooker before. They're at the top of the hill.
It might have been a case where they just, I don't want to say overconfidence, but it might have been. I mean, maybe they just felt that Val was, Val, you're a veteran racer. You'll be able to handle this.
This thing's headed for divorce.
He was consistent with the concern. Bottas was consistent with his concerns throughout the race. He was on it multiple times. And then again, once we get to lap 45 and he gets passed, or lap 49 when he gets passed by Perez, you heard it from him at that point saying, I told you. You got to listen to your drivers.
Yeah, they're in the car.
You really do have to listen to your drivers in that circumstance. So again, I think Toto's certainly has to answer for why no split strategy. Lewis was handling it just fine. That doesn't mean necessarily it was the same situation for Val.
Yeah, it's time maybe to put a contract and a pen in front of Sergio Perez as well and get Checo locked up, because he's got a handle on that car, and he's a great complementary teammate for Max Verstappen when you can split that strategy. Ferrari, going into this race, qualified a little better than maybe some people thought they would. 5th and 7th, Sainz in 5th, Leclerc in 7th, but neither driver finishes in the points. Really disappointing day on the track for Ferrari.
Yeah, Carlos Sainz finishing 11th and Charles Leclerc finishing 16th. There were times during the race where I thought Sainz was doing okay, but he just started to fade towards the end of that.
They were burning their tires out.
They were burning their tires out really quickly. I mean, it was a weird week for Ferrari, where they sounded like they were anticipating that they were not going to have a good weekend, and then you have the qualies, and they looked like, in the practice, and they looked fine, they looked good, maybe, and then it was a bad. Towards the end of it was just a bad race. Leclerc specifically really looked off.
They must have been running a high downforce package.
Had to be running it for them to be that. Seem to be that sluggish on that track. I mean, I think for the most part, Paul Ricard, again, depending on the wind conditions and everything else, you should, lean, not obviously at top speed, but you should at least have a balance or edge slightly towards speed. In this race, I think with the crosswind, balance probably worked best. They'd have it a little bit between, but yeah, they definitely seemed like their package was extra sluggish. So
yeah, the reason Red Bull, the success they had was they didn't run as much downforce as Mercedes, and even with DRS, they couldn't Lewis wasn't going to be able to pass Max, and you could pass guys because you had less downforce on those straights, creating less drag. So that was I thought that was a huge factor. But and you're right though, there is a balance because you have these long, late apex curves at this track, and it sets up for those DRS zones. They're lengthy, but the problem is you can't stay close enough because of the dirty air and what leads up to those DRS zones.
Right, exactly. That's what and again, that's what that's what Hulkenberg talked about in 2019. That's what Dan Rick talked about back then as well. About that's where the race normally dies. Where Paul Ricard the last several years has been such a sluggish race. Not this year though.
Yeah, Gasly started this race. Again, he's just been Mr. Consistent, sixth on the grid, and he ends up finishing the race in seventh place. He only loses one spot. He gets jumped by two McLaren, who we're going to talk about in a minute. But Pierre Gasly, once again, just kind of doing what Pierre Gasly does. He's been Mr. Consistent this year, along with Lando Norris.
He has been. I mean, he is making it really an interesting call for AlphaTauri going into, again, I know they have to lock him up, or again, he may be looking at potentially other drives, but he's been consistent. If you're looking for that, he's a really, for that team, an outstanding lead driver for where they are in the midfield. Whether or not any of the other upper echelon teams or upper end teams are looking to potentially change teammates at the end of the season. We know all the rumors in this case of who may be going where. We discussed that obviously in our midweek podcast when we started. Now, you got to give Pierre a lot of credit. His racecraft has gotten better and better and better each year. Ever since the setback when he got left, I think he's been getting better and better. It started with Monza, which was a huge moment for him.
Oh yeah.
And then after that, he had some rough races after that. But this season has been a solid, consistent work racecraft wise from Pierre Gasly.
He's a mature driver now.
He's mature, exactly. He's more mature, not getting into. I mean, he had that one moment with Lando. I think that was the one turn incident. It was the one incident there that they had where it was just, I think that it was turn 11 incident early on under review. No
Both
penalty.
went off. Yeah.
Lando wasn't happy about it. Both of them went off. It's gonna happen. I didn't see anything necessarily from Pierre where. I get Lando's probably ticked off, but at the same time, I think
it's racing.
It's racing. You gotta accept
that. Not a single yellow flag, a virtual safety car, or a totally clean race. Not a single. I didn't see a yellow flag the entire Grand Prix.
It's like watching that. It's like a 2 hour. This was like watching a quick baseball game. The way this one went.
Does that exist anymore?
Apparently not, unless the pitchers are really going pretty good. I guess.
Yeah. One of the storylines here again, starting the race and grid position, the McLarens didn't look like they were in a great position, that they had the pace in quali. They end up starting 8th and 10th. Lando Norris in the 8th position and Daniel Ricciardo in 10th. But when it came to the race, what McLaren looks like to me, and based on this race, the best of the rest, if you will, the midfield pack, and they finished with a strong 5-6. Lando Norris has finished in the points in every race this season, Mr. Consistent. Daniel Ricciardo, I thought, had a really good race, starting where he did and the overtakes that he had to make in the race. Another great day for McLaren.
It was a great day for McLaren. Outside of, obviously, Red Bull's finish, I think McLaren was probably the winners of the day. I mean, being able
totally agree.
We knew there was a pretty good chance that they were going to move ahead of Ferrari, but this was, I think, a statement for them in terms of, with Ferrari getting no points today. In this circumstance, it was a huge day for McLaren. Ricciardo, especially, as you mentioned, with the multiple overtakes in this race, everybody in that midfield had to keep their ears up for the honey badger, basically, because again, as we all call him, the king of the late breakers, and he had several moments going into those chicanes where his aggressive strategy paid off, and other racers he picked Fernando Alonso at one point during the race. In what was a classic, that was a classic Danny Rick movie there.
Yeah.
When he pipped Alonso on that one area into the Montreal chicane. So it was a great day, I think, for McLaren. They're solidifying they solidify themselves into third now in the Constructors' Championship, and that's kind of where, if they keep this up, that's a good spot for them to be in. You want to see more of this out of Danny Rick. You really do, because he has it in him. Like to see him do a little better in qualies to give himself a better chance here to maybe be able to get a podium like you were hoping he was going to get today, Jason.
Yeah. I had him there.
46. You had him there. Yep.
You just mentioned him, Fernando Alonso. He returns this year. It didn't take him long to get the handle on that Alpine Renault. And he gets to Q3 again for Fernando Alonso. That car's got pace. He's got pace with it. He ends up finishing the race in the points. A nice 8th finish for Fernando Alonso, although Ocon out in his home race finished in 14th. But Fernando Alonso picking up points for Alpine.
Yeah, Fernando. Again, it's been a great return from him after his brief sojourn over in IndyCar. Again, he knows. Again, we talked about this in our midweek podcast how well he knows that team. I think had he been in another car with another engine where he had to do a little bit more adaptation, and again, he by his own admittance, he's not going to tell you that it's where he wants things to be, but considering coming back into Formula One, being able to do what he does, he's a classic battler, always going to have his elbows out, knows. I don't think anybody other than Lewis, in terms of experience, the balance of both performance and experience. Like Raikkonen with a lot of experience, but his car just isn't where it is with Alfa Romeo. So, but he gets I think he gets every bit of dripping, every little ounce of performance out of that Alpine that anybody probably could have. It's disappointed for Ocon. I think, especially after getting that 3-year contract extension. It was a great week going into a home Grand Prix. And him finishing 14th, that had to be a bitter pill for them to take. But Alpine does gain points, and that's important.
All of a sudden now, also Aston Martin coming on. Stroll ends up starting the race in last, and he gets a 10th place finish just behind his teammate, Aston Martin teammate, Sebastian Vettel. Vettel has another good race, gets points again, and it looks like Aston Martin's going to be a team that's going to be collecting points every week for the most part right now. They're both performing well. Stroll had the blowout at Baku, but other than that, he was running a good race at that point, and they've been going with this alternate strategy. Go long in that first stint on the hards, and it's been paying off for him.
It did, yeah, exactly. Both he and Vettel waited for a pretty long time. They started the race on the hards, and then again, you look at Stroll starting 19th. Tsunoda was 20 starting, obviously, because of all the changes to his car after his back that thing up incident.
Yeah.
During qualies. Lance, again, I have a lot of respect. I think a lot of people look at Lance and they think, well, we know the narrative that everybody's
nepotism,
because of nepotism. But I think Lance is a genuinely he absolutely deserves to be in Formula One, and I think what he was able to do in this race, moving up into points, I think is a great, it was an underrated part of this race as well. And Aston, again, if McLaren is kind of moving themselves lock solid in the third, in many ways, Aston has got a chance here to make themselves become the contenders here if Ferrari really falls off. Ferrari's got to have a really good performance. I think they have to make a major recovery at the Styrian and at the Red Bull Ring over the next 2 weeks to make sure that this third to fifth race remains a really competitive one.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They're going to have to start it ASAP, or else you're going to lose touch real quick. George Russell ended up finishing 12th for Williams. Latifi with a disappointing finish in 18th. The two Haas cars rounded out the field with Schumacher edging out Mazepin. The good news is no incidents really with Mazepin this week. Nobody that I saw was complaining about him.
They came. I think it was early in the race there where Mazepin and Schu and Mick came a little bit close on one and
raced each other hard.
They do. They're going to race each other hard. We heard it all week, certainly, between the relationship between the two young guns, between Mazepin and Mick Schumacher, and it's one of those. Definitely, you want to have when we get to Drive to Survive season 4. I want in on the Haas drama, man. That's all I know. I want to see what the hell's going on between those two,
and how Gunther handles it.
That's
Gunther Steiner.
That's Gunter's life right there. He's got two young horses here. He's got to kind of keep from completely knocking each other out, because it's obvious that the two of them. I don't use the phrase don't like. I mean, racers are racers, but I don't think it's the most cordial of relationships.
Yeah, I don't think they're sharing tea and a biscuit on the mornings before quali.
Definitely not.
Uh, the race and now the driver standings are as follows. Max Verstappen increases his lead over Lewis Hamilton. 131 points for Max, leading the way. 119 now for Lewis. He is now 12 points back. Had Max and the incident never happened at Baku, boy, he would be leading by a healthy margin right now. But that's racing; that happens. Sergio Perez in third right now in the driver standings with 84 points, ahead of Lando Norris, who is ahead of Valtteri Bottas with 59. So 76 points for Lando. Boy, just so consistent. And he's going to be a guy that's going to be up there. He's going to end up battling maybe for that third spot with Sergio or Bottas when it's all said and done. Leclerc and Sainz at 6 and 7, 52 points for Leclerc and 42 for Sainz. Gasly at 8 with 37. Danny Rick, despite his struggles, ninth in the driver standings with 34 points, and Sebastian Vettel with 30 right now as well. So pretty interesting from a driver standing standpoint. We got to see if Mercedes can turn this around, not only for Lewis Hamilton and the title chase, not that it's a runaway at any point right here, but Red Bull also in the constructors, and 215 points in the constructors, leading Mercedes, who have 178. It's a big wide margin right now.
Yeah, the gap is wide, and that was the thing. Once you get Sergio on that podium, that's where things really got to the point of where things are really beginning to widen here. And it's thankfully, though, I think it's still a recoverable one, I think, for Mercedes. But again, the next 2 weeks are going to be critical. They got to get multiple. They need multiple podiums. They need two guys on the stand. They really, really do. Because again, McLaren currently at 110, as you said. Ferrari drops to 94. Aston Martin's at 40 right now. So that's, again, there's still a big gap there. So Ferrari still is kind of safe, still somewhat safe in that circumstance. But yeah, when you get down to it right now, Red Bull is right now currently the class. And this is an unfamiliar spot, I think, for Mercedes. They have not been here in quite some time to have that kind of a gap between themselves and between themselves and the top team. And again, it goes down to, as we all said, Jason, at the beginning of the season, having a really good team and two good drivers is so critical.
Yep.
Red Bull couldn't compete last year. I mean, Verstappen had a lot of wipeouts last year. Alex Albon really, despite at least the podium struggled. That's a heck of a team now. Max has matured even more. Sergio is your perfect 1A teammate in this.
And a car.
And a car, exactly. And the car, everything that's going into that right now, you got to give Horner, Christian Horner and this team a lot of credit here for really making this it's a fascinating race. It's a fascinating race in the constructors. And also, again, Lewis is, be careful to, underrate Lewis Hamilton at your peril.
Yeah, don't put dirt on him.
Do not.
Keep the shovels in the garage for now.
Exactly. You do not. I mean, he's still one of the, still arguably, one of the greatest of all time, right up there with Michael Schumacher. And I anticipated, Mercedes, I expected Mercedes to have a better weekend than they did. Certainly Bottas recovering, them getting points was critical, but you wanted to have two podium spots. And that's where I think Val realized that, even from the team, we could say that there maybe there's some tension between Val and the team, but at the end of the day, Val the team does well, that does better for him. And for him not to be on that podium when he felt that he had a chance if they followed his advice. Yeah. That's the story of the weekend.
Can you explain this to me? Was Mercedes so frazzled that they didn't pit Bottas at the end to get the fastest lap, and they just let Max have the extra point? I mean, he finished over 60 seconds ahead of fifth place Lando Norris. I don't know why they didn't pit him. It was so safe. I mean, you could have had a 15-second pit stop and still been clear and put him out on some fresh softs or another set of mediums or something and let him get the fastest lap and take the point away from Verstappen.
Exactly. Verstappen, that's a perfect, as good a weekend as you could possibly imagine for Red Bull.
He ends up at 26.
26, and then you add, and obviously you add in Perez's points in this case for the lead that happens. It's strange. That tells me again, Val was hot. He was really, maybe they were taken aback by just how angry he was.
What, they think he was going to get a
But
tongue lashing at the pit stop?
right. But again, not to do exactly. It's strange to say that. Thinking about that for a second, it's like you still got to have your head about you.
Yeah, there was some scuffling in their garage when Perez pulled up on his gearbox.
Yeah,
I don't know why they didn't bring him in.
It befuddled me. It definitely did. I figured at that point, let him get in and let him get that point.
Yeah,
it didn't make any sense. And I guess they felt like, hey, you'll be able to hold off fifth and finish fourth, and we'll recover next week. But in this race, any point, I don't want to give away a point. You don't want to give away a point in this race.
Yeah, not to your competitor in any way, shape, or form. I mean, if you can take it and prevent them from getting it, it's essentially 2 points, right? Because you got one and they didn't. So, to me, that was a bit of a bit of a brain fart, I think, for Mercedes to not just bring him in. They had so much time to be able to do it, and it would not have been a difficult lap to top at that point with as low as the fuel was. On fresh, soft tires, you could have gone out there and done a quality lap, and it would have been no problem to take that point. I don't know why they didn't do it.
And Val, then you harness it, and he's really ticked off. He'll lock in. He'll channel that anger to get that, at least to salvage something.
Yeah. Yeah, and feel good about something when the Grand Prix ends. Well, it's quick turnaround this weekend. It's going to be a track that I love. I love watching races at the Red Bull Ring, Styrian Grand Prix, and Austria. It's going to be fascinating. 3 races in a row. So this is such an important stretch. Can Red Bull continue this dominance? They got the hat trick now. Can they add a 4th coming up next Sunday? We'll have to wait and see. And happy Father's Day to everybody out there, at least in the United States, if you're listening. It is Father's Day while we're taping this. So great race at the French Grand Prix. Any final thoughts?
Again, going into this, it's just, the fact that Red Bull, for all the talk of them having their concerns coming into this race, for them to perform as well as they did, speaks a lot to, what the direction of where this season may go. The battle between Hamilton and Verstappen remains must-see television in my mind. Watching the two of them battle is a joy, and I'm hoping to see more of it next. And we hope each week we get to see more of it every week. It's like watching a heavyweight fight week after week after week, and it's just so it's so exciting. And especially after last year, after everything that happened with COVID and everything, and you add to the mix. You add also just how Mercedes just absolutely dominated last season and made last season almost a snore. This is what we all like. This is what we want.
This is like Jordan versus Magic Johnson every week. 2 great players, 2 great drivers, different styles and different ways of skinning the cat, if you will, and they're both going head-to-head. It's like seeing those two just go head-to-head in every single race. That's what it's been so far. So it's been awesome. Our standings in the pick the grid and pick the podium, I ended up with 5 points because I had Verstappen for the win. You had Hamilton as the winner, but he was on the podium, so you get a point for that. My other 2, I had Perez actually on the podium.
No, you had Ricardo.
Oh no, I had Ricardo. That's right.
You had Ricardo as a sleeper to be on the
yeah. Oh yeah, I had Verstappen, Hamilton, Ricardo. You had Hamilton, Verstappen, Bottas. Okay, so our standings on the pick the podium right now. I have a 4-point lead in the constructor. So good start to the season for me.
Good start for you. I was like up until around there was like 5 laps to go. I had it exact that Lewis, Max, and Bottas.
Yeah, the trifecta.
But I'm watching the issues and going, this isn't going to stay.
Yes,
this is good. This is going to disappear real quick. So I saw Perez, who again, Perez is a racer, as you and I both have great affinity for Sergio. Happy to see him again getting on the podium. But from my picks perspective, that kind of got scuttled.
Yeah,
we may have to do some sort of a midfield at a certain point to really add to challenge this thing. We're going to need to add maybe a midfield thing too.
I like that. Yeah,
the idea of maybe picking out the top, maybe determining a top 10 or a top 5 or a top 10 versus just the podium.
I like that. And also heading into Austria, Max has 2 wins at that track in 2018-19. Lewis Hamilton's got a couple wins on that track as well. So it's going to be a fascinating week. We'll preview it coming up in just a couple of days' time, and the Grand Prix will be happening a week from today. And, of course, we'll bring you a reaction to that as well. Thanks for listening, everybody. This has been episode 2 of the Stick to F1 podcast. We'll talk to you this week as we prepare to go to Austria.